Welcome to Mom and Mind, a podcast about maternal mental health from conception, pregnancy, to birth and postpartum. Real stories from moms and family members who've made it from struggling to wellness, and interviews with experts and advocates who work for moms and families to get the help they need. We discuss very real struggles that can sometimes be hard to hear, but these are stories that need to be told so that moms and families can know that healing is possible. This podcast is meant to offer information and awareness and is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome back to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. I am personally very excited to bring you today's episode because it resonates for me so deeply, and I've been excited and waiting to have this conversation. We are going to be talking about the highly sensitive person and how those characteristics may be interacting with the life of a new mother in the transition to motherhood. I've been really intrigued by this topic since listening to our guest today, Julie Bjelland, when she was a guest on another podcast, and it just really made me think a lot about how these characteristics of a highly sensitive person might impact the transition to motherhood. So we're going to get into that today. We're going to talk about who or what is an HSP, or highly sensitive person, what might be a common experience for HSP women and mothers. And I'm excited to get into this exploratory conversation because there is research on HSP traits, but not yet quite on HSP traits in the perinatal woman. And so we're going to explore this a little bit and try and get some foundational understanding just to kind of see how this might apply to the moms and women and fathers and people that are in the transition to parenthood. Our guest today, Julie Bjelland, is an LMFT and HSP psychotherapist and author of Brain Training for the Highly Sensitive Person: Techniques to Reduce Anxiety and Overwhelming Emotions. Julie's mission is to help sensitive people reduce the challenges and increase the positives through her website, specializing in highly sensitive people, also known as sensory processing sensitivity. Julie has a mission to spread awareness and education about the trait of high sensitivity and believes the world needs the gifts of sensitive people. So let's meet Julie. Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I think this is going to be an excellent topic for us to talk about.
Yes, I do too. I am like a little giddy and sort of beyond excited to have this conversation with you because, like I was telling you just before we started, I've listened to you on another podcast called Women in Depth and your interviews there. And I love the work that Lourdes is doing there. And it just really listening to you on there made me make some connections between what it is potentially to be a highly sensitive person or highly sensitive mom and how that might impact going through this perinatal period. So I'd really like to dig into that and see what you know and see what you can share with us about that.
That sounds great. And I'm so glad you're doing that. We need people like you out there that are kind of specializing in these special niches and can pull in different kinds of information to help people through these times.
Thank you. I do think it's going to be really important for a lot of women and men to hear this. So I'd love to start just from the beginning and give people a basic understanding of what are we talking about. So we're going to talk about what it's like to be a highly sensitive person during this perinatal period. But if you can start giving us the foundation, what or who is an HSP or highly sensitive person?
Yes, sure. So we also call highly sensitive people, the scientific name is sensory processing sensitivity. And it is a trait, an inherited trait, and it is not a disorder. So that's good to kind of acknowledge.
Yeah.
And it's already been found in over 100 species. It's the same across genders. And it's not the same thing as introversion because there's actually 30% are extroverts and 70% are introverts. So there are a lot of overlapping, but not quite the same. And Elaine, Aron has really been a pioneer in researching this trait and often the person where most of us learned about the trait. And it's been just a real passion of mine to work with highly sensitive people and helping them thrive because there's so many gifts and there's definitely challenges, but there's a lot of positives with this trait too. And then one thing that Elaine Aron has come up with is she came up with the acronym DOES, which describes the trait. So everybody that is highly sensitive, we call them HSPs for short, have D stands for depth of processing. O is for overstimulation. E is for emotionally responsive. And S is for sensitivity to subtle stimuli. And so it's about 20% of the population, although some of the newer research is showing it could be up to 30% or more if we're also including kind of lower sensitivities in that group.
Okay. Yeah. So these are people who feel deeply.
Yes.
On some level. I'm curious to know, is there a difference between having this highly sensitive trait and being an empath? Or is there a high crossover there too?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that. I know Elaine Aron kind of tries to stay away from conversations about empath because she wants the research that's showing up for people who have this trait to be sort of scientifically based so that it's accepted amongst the community.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of talk about what crosses over and what doesn't, but I tend to stay on the side of Elaine Aron at this point anyways, just to make sure I'm kind of one of those people that are out there given the scientific definitions, because we really want this to be something that this trait absolutely exists, and we want it to be something that's really taken seriously in the medical community and the mental health community and things like that.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense to me, having listened to some of the stuff you've talked about, that there are many implications for having this sensory processing sensitivity. And another part of that is what I hear often is that people come in saying they're too sensitive, or people have told them they are too sensitive. And that though even the word sensitive sometimes comes with a judgment, or that somehow you're not able to handle things. And I'm hoping that what you're saying, having the science behind this, puts that idea away, that it's not just, oh, you can't handle stuff. It's that there's this actual process happening.
Yeah,
for
so
people.
It's not connected to like a weakness or something that we actually, it's exciting because the new research is showing that there's real brain differences in someone that's an HSP, and that's a very validating, I think, for us to know that and to understand that. And I think that's a big part of moving towards acceptance of the trait. And also, depending on, I work globally with HSPs, so I see differences depending on the culture and how they define the word sensitive. So like in the United States, the word sensitive tends to have that negative connotation, and definitely part of the group that's trying to change that and see that as more of a positive, because it has so many positives. We certainly are more empathetic, more aware, more intuitive, more compassionate. And as to speak towards your subject, we're even seeing parents can be very creative parents with this trait, if they're taking care of themselves in the right way, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today.
Yes. I really hope to, because I think all of these traits that you're describing fit for so many, at least for a lot of the moms that are in my practice, but really even for myself, when I was listening to your conversations on other podcasts, it just, even after the fact, I'm healed, I'm better, but it just made me think like, oh my gosh, that's probably why things were so difficult. And it then obviously made me want to reach out to you and see if we could talk about that, and which ways could this trait potentially make things more challenging during the transition into parenthood. And then to speak to your point, what are the benefits? What are the gifts that come with it? Yeah. So maybe we can start first with what might be a common experience for somebody who has this trait, a woman, a mother. What are the things they might be experiencing, either just in general or in relation to motherhood?
Well, one of the things that I see most in my work with HSP moms is that we're usually at the bottom of our priority lists. There's so much to do just in a day. And being a mom, there's even more to do. So unless someone is really consciously making efforts to like step up their self-care and do things that are taking care of themselves, it's not always a big default of ours with the trait in general. I've seen we tend to take care of others first. That seems to be a big part of our trait, and that's a beautiful thing, that we take such good care of those around us, and we often know what our partner's needs are before they even know them, or we know what our children's needs are before they even know them, and that can be really beneficial to parenting. But what happens most of all is burnout, depletion, and I think there's a big difference between our wellness as I think about, I use the word kind of untrained HSP versus trained HSP.
Yeah.
To just kind of define, like, once you learn about why you are the way you are and why things impact you the way they do, it's really helps you understand that you need to do a certain kind of self-care. And I consider self-care to be medicine for as sensitive people. And that's going to look different to different people. But in general, self-care is sort of a conscious action that you take to do something that lowers your stress numbers, brings you back down to like kind of a balanced, as close as you can be to a balanced, centered state. And I'm a mom too. So I remember when my two children were 22 months apart and I was exhausted.
Yeah.
I was so exhausted. And I remember having meltdowns in the middle of the night because I was so sleep deprived.
Right.
And that's a big part of the problem is generally HSPs do a lot worse without enough sleep. And
yes.
It's a huge problem. I know for myself, I'm a completely different person if I've slept well versus I haven't had enough sleep. And that's a big part of the trait too, is so kind of understanding that you're going to have specific needs as a highly sensitive person. And once you understand and meet those needs, then you really start to live your life in a completely different way. And a lot of moms come to me and they're like, there's no way I can, take an hour to myself. But then when they kind of challenge them and to be creative and find ways, they come back and tell me and like, oh my gosh, I was so much more focused and efficient. I actually got more done when I took time to myself to recharge and refuel.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the great point and where the issue intersects for new parents is, there's all these in the backdrop, these cultural messages about what we should be doing as parents and as mothers and what motherhood is going to look like when we transition into this. And the self-sacrificing mother is a really common like myth and kind of stereotype of what that is. And especially if we don't have a practice of taking care of ourselves and then we go into this transition where people are needing even more from us, I feel like this is really ripe for especially an HSP mom or dad to have a more difficult time during this transition.
Absolutely. Well said. I agree with everything that you said. That's really true. And I've observed that people who have this trait generally are quite hard on themselves. Yeah. We tend to have very high expectations of ourselves and actually others around us too, which can lead to different problems in relationships and friendships and workspaces and such. But kind of understanding why you are the way you are is a great first step, and start to kind of, I often talk about like we have these default settings that are going to pop up, and the default is, focus on everybody else's needs and be hard on ourselves.
Oh my gosh. Yep.
And what's so sad? And you probably can agree with me on this, I'm sure in your experience, I've never heard a mom sit with me and say, I think I'm doing it all right.
Right.
Right?
No, I have not heard that.
I'm not doing enough, or I'm not enough. Something like that is the message, the label. And labels, we have to look at our labels.
Yeah, it's really pervasive to be feeling those things. And then I am thinking, a lot of people feel that anyways, HSP or not. But then with this HSP trait, it's just felt so much more deeply, and I imagine feels more bad.
Yes. Everything is a bit magnified and can be a bit magnified. And, we have there are specific parts of our brain that get overactivated that is also important to kind of understand it within the trait, and that can impact us a lot as mothers.
What part is that gets overactivated?
For example, we have a more activation in the brain mirror neuron system. That's one that will literally fire some of the same neurons as something that we're observing. So we can be very in tune with people around us. But if we don't learn about kind of creating certain boundaries with that and kind of a space between us and others, we're sort of merging into everybody's moods and everybody's experiences and everybody's pain. So that's an important thing to kind of pay attention to. It's got its benefits. We need to be careful and make sure we're taking care of that part of ourselves, that we're not losing ourselves in that. Right. That can be important. And there's a different research coming up about, I've been saying in the past about that I believe that there's an increase in our amygdala activation, which is that fight, flight, freeze part of the brain. And we need to see more research in this area, but I'm definitely seeing high levels of anxiety in this trait. And in fact, I recommend people, mental health professionals, doctors and such, that when somebody presents with something that looks like anxiety, to screen them to see if they have this trait. And almost all of the people that I've screened that show anxiety have this trait.
Wow. That says quite a bit. Right. Because just thinking out loud, if you have this sensitivity, sensory processing sensitivity, of course you would feel anxious. It makes perfect sense to me that you're constantly trying to manage all of this stimulation. Sometimes you don't even know where it's coming from, especially, if you happen to be sensitive to other people's emotional states and whatnot, or like you said, you're untrained in how to recognize this. What do you do with all of that extra feeling?
Yeah, exactly. And like you were saying about the sensory part of it, that's a part that a lot of us don't quite realize that we're experiencing until we understand more about the trait. Mm-hmm. That can be like a baby crying, for example, or the noise of having young children in the home, for example, pops up as a big problem. But people often don't recognize that that's what it is. They'll just think that they're very irritable, or they're angry, they're losing their temper, or they're losing their patience or something like that. But a lot of times these are connected to sensory experiences, the increase of that impact for us. And so kind of coming up with ways that kind of notice that. I've talked to both moms and dads about maybe they come home after work, or they're trying to make dinner at night and there's just so much noise. The TV's on, everybody's asking them for something, and they're just snapping and irritable. And when they recognize this might actually be a sensory thing, well, what if we change the way we're doing things at home? Like when we're cooking, we have more quiet, where we kind of teach the family that we have sit down talks with them after we're doing our cooking or whatever it is. We also just need more support at home. I don't think that, I think the way families are doing it now is that everybody is so depleted, so overwhelmed, so exhausted. Yeah. And, we're not set up as humans to be doing everything that we're doing without more support.
It's so true. That is absolutely 1,000% true. It is a lot. But what happens, I think, is, that I'm really excited to see what the research says about the amygdala. And I definitely understand the mirror neuron thing. The implications for me when I think about a diagnosis or something going on with a mom who's having a perinatal anxiety or depression during pregnancy or postpartum, but very specifically for moms who have intrusive thoughts and being overwhelmed by their own overwhelm, if that makes sense. Just the implications of in my mind anyways, I'm theorizing completely, but of having this trait while going through the process and transition through pregnancy, through birth, into this early postpartum period where everything is new and there's potential to feel overwhelmed by so many things that are new. And then to have this trait, I just wonder how much it contributes to the perinatal anxiety or depression or OCD even.
Oh, I would think so, a lot. And there's so many things if you think about the aspect of it, the kind of mind, body, spirit indications of everything is changing. Your body's changing, your hormones are changing, your levels of energy are changing, your relationship is changing. We also tend to have a difficult time with changing and transitions too, because I always make a joke that HSPs kind of want to run up ahead of themselves and smooth out the path before they get there.
Oh my gosh, that's so true.
And now we're trying to do that with multiple people at home, right? Or being pregnant. And it's really just so significant. And I talk about this sometimes on some of my social media and post questions like this. And a lot of the times what comes up for people as they talk about what worked and what didn't was, the people that said when I could ask for some help or I could make sure, we actually recommend that HSPs get 2 hours of alone time a day. And I know that moms think that that's completely impossible. But there are creative ways to do that or to get close to that. I know when my kids were little, I made friends with other moms that were the same age. And sometimes we would swap and, take care of each other's children so that we would get that time to ourselves. Or we even did something for a while where we would cook for each other. wasn't that much harder to cook a larger amount. So say if I'm making a dish, I'd make a big amount for my friend, and then that would be her meal that she wouldn't have to prepare. And then vice versa, she'd do that for us.
That's great.
And little things like that help. And I know Lourdes, in fact, talked about this in one of the podcasts, that she learned how to do downtime with her little young son, that he could also benefit from it by doing, coloring or drawing or some quiet activity that she was also then in a quiet activity. And I would do that with my kids. I would kind of recognize that I would need quiet time. So there would be certain times that would be designated like quiet times. And everybody could do whatever they wanted, but it had to be quiet. And that was actually good for all of us. And sensory related, very important for the HSP system.
Right. So I'm thinking of right now, the mom who's listening, like, oh, maybe this is me. You named some of the common things that come up is that HSPs tend to need more sleep. I don't know if you said perfectionist, but that's how I interpreted it.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
I always say we kind of have a perfectionist measuring stick with us, that we're measuring everything against perfection, everything that we do. But the problem with doing that is that we fail every single time, since there's no such thing as perfection.
Oh, man, right?
Where we're always feeling that we're not good enough or not doing enough. And we need to change that message.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many implications in the transition into motherhood with that. Oh, yeah, there's a lot there. So just to kind of highlight a couple of things that people could identify with, the perfectionism, the needing more sleep. You went over a couple of others. If we can just kind of highlight some common traits in moms.
Yeah, I think our self-talk is a big part, really important to pay attention to, that we're often so critical with ourselves that that's like kicking ourselves while we're down instead of developing self-compassion. So I have observed that many of the HSPs I've worked with, including myself before I did my work, was that we have really low levels of self-compassion. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And that makes sense if we're having high levels of, perfectionism and high standards of ourselves. So developing self-compassion is like one of the best things that you could do for yourself. And that takes time. That's a skill building technique that you have to work on getting better at. I always say like the 10th time you do it is going to be better than the first time you do it.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I'm really excited to get into the how. That'll be great. So I'll keep that in mind for developing compassion. So tend to be perfectionists, need more sleep. What are some other things?
You mean in terms of like some of the challenges?
Yeah. What might somebody notice about themselves?
It's possible that you might get overstimulated a lot. And that can show up in different kinds of experiences, mood-wise, irritability, anger. A lot of times where we feel misunderstood, we feel different. I mean, if there's only like 20% of us where we are experiencing the world in a different way. And if we're feeling like there's something wrong with us, that is a layer of darkness on everything.
Yeah.
And, that is an incredibly healing piece of the puzzle. And that's something I certainly had to work on, was changing the message from, I'm weird and different and there's something wrong with me, to I'm unique and I've got these really special parts of this trait that make me, more compassionate, more empathetic, more aware. We actually have an increase in certain parts of the brain that have to do with attention, action planning, levels of awareness, levels of consciousness. And much of the research is showing that HSPs tend to do really well, actually benefit the most from, for example, therapy and different kinds of interventions. We tend to benefit the most from those. I think once I have found that for sure working with HSPs, is once you kind of give them the information and point out levels of consciousness to kind of pay attention to in your life, which is really the basis of everything in terms of self-care and being well. Yeah. That just makes the biggest difference in the well-being of an HSP.
Yeah, I can absolutely resonate with that. I mean, I think the first time I heard you say it's a sensory processing sensitivity, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense to me. And from then on, every time I felt overwhelmed, I was like, okay, I'm overstimulated right now. I need to change something.
Yes. Isn't that so different to like define it as that, as like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, it's absolutely relieving. And, I know like just as therapists, we tend to bring in people somehow who are similar to us or have the same set of things to deal with. So I happen to have a lot of HSPs in my practice, a couple of HSP men as well, which I just think is so fascinating. We certainly don't talk about men being sensitive, at all.
Yeah. And that shows up in different ways. I've had some show up and say they think they have an anger problem, or it might show up in couples work where they're arguing about something. And I can remember working with some that it's like they didn't even realize that there was some sort of sensory overload happening. And once when we came up with little things, like one dad, I remember he would come home and it was like the stimulation of the loudness of the home when he got home with the kids would just set him off. So we did little practices to kind of get him ready to sort of walk in the door. And we even recommended that he start wearing earplugs for the first 20 to 30 minutes that he would get home. And it helped. It changed everything because this couple was fighting and, it was terrible things were happening and they didn't even recognize that that's what that was.
Right. I mean, that makes so much sense too, when you can say, okay, well, this is not like who you are. This is not a you problem, so to speak. This is just how your brain processes stuff.
Yeah. It makes a difference to kind of go about it. I like to think of it as like, I really appreciate in my partner that there's just this sort of matter of fact nature about it. It's like, okay, you need this. Okay, we'll do that. It's not something that we're looking at as like, this is a bad thing and this is a weakness. It's just like, oh, you do better going to restaurants at off-peak times. Okay, let's do that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Instead of being completely overloaded by the sound of a busy restaurant, for example.
That makes perfect sense. Okay. So as we've been talking through this, I keep thinking about all of the pregnant and postpartum moms that I meet with. And I'm thinking about a lot of the group members who come into the perinatal support group. You mentioned that how difficult change can be, how overwhelming it can be to, dealing with the high standards, wanting to kind of know what's coming before it comes, or at least smoothing it out beforehand, feeling irritable, feeling misunderstood, feeling different. All of this stuff is so ripe in the perinatal period. And I just wonder, if some part of me is like, well, about 20% of moms will deal with a perinatal mental health condition. Is that like, what are the chances that 20% of people are HSPs? Not suggesting that every person who has a perinatal mental health condition is also an HSP, but I imagine there's some deep overlap.
I would think so too. And in fact, we're thinking that at least 50% of clients in therapy in general are HSPs.
Wow. I mean, for 20% of the population, for 50% to be in the therapy population is a big number.
Yeah, it's a big number.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, I have no science around this, but my brain just starts kind of like trying to make connections and understand so that we can figure out how to support moms better and dads better through this transition, that maybe we are missing something, that we should be really, like you said before, screening all moms, all dads to see if they fit on this scale of sensory processing sensitivity.
Yeah, I think that it's, our scaling system that we're using right now is Elaine Aron's 27 question test. It's like a true or false test. And in addition to that, kind of being able to put together some of the other pieces of it. But like myself scored 27 out of 27 on, I answered true to every single one of those questions. And having been a mom I've had 2 children, I get it on a personal level as too. And I think that if there's a tendency to have anxiety and or depression anyway, that can actually be increased in HSPs, have a higher chance of having anxiety or depression in general if we've had environments in our upbringing that didn't feel supportive.
Right.
And in fact, the research is showing that highly sensitive children growing up in environments where they are supported and understood are actually less likely to have anxiety and depression. And if we were to transfer that information into a pregnant mom, for example, what if we were actually to support her in the right ways?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That we could see big changes happening.
Absolutely. And then also impact her parenting experience or even her child's experience. I mean, just for me, learning that my daughter is HSP also, my son is potentially also, and just understanding this trait about myself and that this could be part of who they are makes me parent in a different way. I take care of myself and them in a different way.
Yeah, good for you, because that's how you're going to prevent. My boys now are 14 and 16, and I watch them and think, oh my gosh, like I never had that kind of confidence and
right.
myself. And they don't have anxiety and depression. And, it just impresses me, and it makes me realize like it's definitely, I see that for sure, what they're saying about if you can learn, like not only are you going to be helping yourself, if you learn about this, figure out the ways that take care of you best, but transfer that into raising your children with those same tools. And you're going to prevent a lot of problems for them in their life too.
Right. I mean, even if we're kind of only, so to speak, taking care of ourselves, we're reducing our own irritability. We have more bandwidth, when we are able to be present and there to kind of deal with whatever's coming at us. I just think there's so many good possibilities here in terms of understanding this trait specifically. I mean, for everybody, but since this is what I do, specifically for perinatal parents, women and men, who are going and through the process of transition into parenthood, there's just so much potential to have an easier go of it if we understand this about ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there needs to be kind of a paradigm shift too in how our expectations of pregnant women, of new moms, of new families, all of it. And a big part of another piece to kind of add to what you were talking about earlier is a big thing that I see in HSPs is that many of us do not actually know what our needs are.
Yes.
And if we don't know what our needs are, we're not going to have our needs met.
That's so true. Oh my gosh, that's so true.
Yeah.
So what can we do? There's a lot of really beautiful parts to this. And I should say there's a lot of really beautiful parts to this. And also there's so much room for us to kind of do better for ourselves and do better for, I'm thinking of the therapists who are listening, for the people that we're helping. So you said one possibility is help develop compassion.
Yes.
Can you expand on that and talk about some other possibilities for healing?
Yeah. And self-compassion is such an important skill to develop. And I love Kristin Neff's work around that. And I teach kind of 3 steps of self-compassion building. And I don't know if you want me to share that.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I love this one. And like when I first started my work, I had 0 self-compassion. And so I'm one of those people that kept practicing and practicing and practicing until I actually started to feel it. And it's so important, like how we're talking to ourselves, because I believe that our experience is like manageable a lot of times, but it's the judgment that we're putting on ourselves that's that extra 1,000-pound weight that makes it impossible to manage in that moment. So if we're really struggling in a particular moment, or we really need something, being able to practice self-compassion, it literally lights up centers of the brain that are more calming, that are more positive, that, will lead to feeling more energy, for example, less draining, because it's very draining to be so hard on ourselves.
Oh my gosh, right?
Our energy is so, we have to care for our energy. And I think as highly sensitive people, our energy tanks get drained faster. So caring for like, where is that energy going is so important.
Yes. Yeah. That's fantastic. Okay. That would really take some of that emotional burden off, just to include self-compassion in. You did mention taking breaks as much as possible and that's important. Can you say a little bit more about why that's important?
Oh, that's so important. Like I think about our nervous systems as like an internal motor. And similar to like if we were to floor the gas pedal of a car all day long, what's going to happen? That engine's going to burn out. And that's our experience too. And so taking little breaks throughout the day, I always say, I actually recommend HSPs like every time you go to the bathroom, because that's several times spread out throughout the day, you ask yourself 2 questions. How am I doing? And what do I need?
Wow. That's really so simple, but so powerful.
Yeah, because if we're paying attention, we can do something about our needs. Like, oh, actually, I'm really tired. Okay, what do I need? Okay, maybe I need to take a little rest. Okay, the baby's going to go down for a nap. Maybe I'll nap with the baby. And a lot of women talked to me about breastfeeding as being something that was, of course, there's a variety of how women experience that, but a lot of HSP shared with me that breastfeeding was something that was soothing for them, and it releases some of those feel-good hormones. And so being able to do that in quiet spaces, like take that as your opportunity to go to the other room by yourself and lay quietly with the baby, as an example.
Right. Yeah, that's a great idea. But I also appreciate the creativity of, to allow yourself to take a break, even if you are doing something, even if you are still having to tend to the baby. But there are creative ways that you can do that, even if you're not actually sleeping. Just resting, lowering, like turning down the volume on everything around you.
Yes, I would say get off your phones, your computers, your to-do list.
Yeah.
And really let yourself, like my thing is baths.
Yeah.
I love baths. It's like something that just completely centers me, and it's quiet and it's relaxing and it's something I have access to.
Right.
So another thing is mindfulness. I found practicing little bits of mindfulness throughout the day can be really great for thinking about turning down that engine, that internal nervous system motor. Little things like when you're taking a shower, for example, be in the shower.
Right.
Like think about the water and the smells and the sensory experience, rather than having your brain, moving a million miles a minute about like what you have to get done after that shower.
Right.
Little things like you're drinking your cup of tea or coffee, be with it in that few seconds right there. Like purposely every day, do things that bring in a feeling of peace, positivity. Like I do things like, look at the birds outside, listen to the birds outside. That's something that I love doing. Or paying attention to leaves on a plant, like really getting absorbed into nature, putting your feet into the grass, spending time in nature is a big one that usually makes people feel filled up. And you can do that with your kids too. Like I used to go places and when my boys were little and, let them explore around in nature. And it was good for all of us. And little things that you do, but each one of these things that I'm talking about are conscious efforts. So if I step into the bathtub just to get clean, my experience is going to be very different than if I step into the bathtub as an act of self-love.
Yeah. Aww. I just so wish everybody could do this for themselves. I mean, it's going to sound sort of Pollyannish right now, but I just feel like the world would be a better place if we could all take care of ourselves with that kind of loving tenderness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and maybe, that's something that you can do to support a friend that's pregnant or has a baby or has children, is to encourage them to do these little things. And sometimes we need to be reminded. And in some cultures, they actually have things where like the mother is at home for a whole month and everybody else is sort of taking care of them during that month.
Right. Yeah. We unfortunately don't have that here.
We don't have that, but we need to find ways that get closer to that somehow. And really taking care of ourselves and our moms.
That's so important. I thank you so much. I feel like I could ask a million more questions about this just in my mind. I feel like I need to sift through a little bit about what the implications are fully for pregnancy and birth and postpartum. But I'm hopeful that the people who are listening can either, if you yourselves are identifying as an HSP, or you're a therapist who thinks you might be helping and supporting, perinatal folks during this transition, to really take what Julie said and think deeply about how this might be applying to yourself or the parents you're supporting, because we could be helping in so much of a deeper way if we're thinking about this trait.
Yeah, it's a very holistic process, isn't it? And I agree, we could talk about this for hours, and such an important topic. And it's important that we talk about this, that we get it out in the open and we normalize it for women. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving us all of this information, helping me and helping us really think about this more deeply. And I'm so positive and hopeful that this is going to help so many people.
Yay. Thanks for having me. It was really great to talk about this subject with you. And thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you so much. I don't know about you guys, but my mind is sort of still buzzing from this and still trying to make some connections on how these traits of the HSP person might be impacting this transition to motherhood. And talking a little bit off air with Julie, we decided to further our conversation at some later point to try and get into really some other details of what this might look like and how understanding this might help someone who has these traits and who is going through the transition to parenthood. If you'd like to get connected to Julie, please find her at juliebjelland.com, JuliebBjelland.com. She's also on Facebook at The Highly Sensitive Person, Instagram, HSP Psychotherapist, and Twitter, Julie Bjelland. As usual, if this is your first time joining us, please subscribe to this podcast so that you get each episode when it comes out every Monday. Then you'll be able to pick and choose, listen to the ones that really resonate for you. And I'd love to have you in our community at the Mom and Mind Facebook connection. And please connect with us on any of our other social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We'd love to have you in our community. So glad to have you with us today. And until next time. By joining us today, you are part of the growing community of people who are aware and concerned for mothers and families during this beautiful and sometimes very difficult time of life. If you or someone you know is having a hard time, help is available. You can feel better. Please look for resources for help at momandmind.com. Together, we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Thank you for listening and being a part of the Mom and Mind community.